On that point, Secretary General, the Foreign Minister of Oman, Sayed Badr al-Busaidi, recently stated at Manama Dialogue 2-3 weeks ago, "We have long known that Israel, not Iran, is the prime source of insecurity in the region." That he said, "We have long known," seems to suggest that this was not something that just came about because of the Israeli attack on Doha. And Prince Turki Al-Faisal of Saudi Arabia, otherwise known to be rather hawkish on Iran, repeated the same thing 2 days ago in Dubai, saying that it is definitely Israel that is the troublemaker and should be reined in by the US. At the same time, Washington has not shifted its perception. The NSS that was published yesterday by the Trump administration repeats the more than 4-decade-long formulation in the US, which is that Iran is the chief destabilizing force of the region. Secretary General, was al-Busaidi's statement something that only speaks for Oman? Does it speak for other countries in the GCC? And if the latter, how is the GCC then going to manage it, mindful of the fact that the US seems to be so out of sync with the GCC, while it nevertheless believes that its perception of Iran's role is something that is still shared by regional states?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me in this panel with these two great scholars. First of all, I would like to reply to Agaya ظریف by saying, I assure you, and I assure the Iranian leadership and the Iranian people that nobody in the GCC wants Iran to go down the drain. So you should name the people that want you to go down the drain. So yes. So everybody understands and comprehends exactly your point. Second of all, you mentioned the Iran-Iraq war, and you hinted at the GCC countries, and this is a discussion that will take 3 hours because there were also some policies taken by Iran in the 80s, and I'm a Kuwaiti, and I've seen it, and I've lived it, and I have experienced it, but we don't want to go there because that's not the reason why we are here. We are here to talk about the present and to talk about the future. How do we make our region as peaceful, as stable, as prosper with our brothers and sisters in Iran? This is what we need to talk about. We need to put the foundation, we need to put the right steps and take the right steps towards trust-building measures, trust-building acts in order to really enjoy what we have experienced as GCC countries. We need to show Iran how we, in 7-8 decades, became the 9th economy in the world. The 6th GCC country, Mr. ظریف, GDP in 2024 is 2.4 trillion because of good governance, because of great management and great leadership. I'm sure Iran also has the same thing. This is what we would like to share with Iran. But there are really serious measures that we would like our brothers in Iran to take. We need the idea of exporting the revolution, the good neighboring, the policies that Iran sometimes take that really shakes the stability of the region. And I give you an example, Houthi support. The UN Charter needs to be respected. The acts of dialogue and discussion and non-interference with the Shiites in the GCC countries or in any other country. We have took the right steps toward Iran. We have Saudi Arabia normalizing with Iran in 2023. We have our brothers in Oman taking the lead for trying to negotiate between you and the United States. And the GCC countries called Mr. Iraqchi last year in October, and we sat with him in Doha discussing ways to move forward in this relationship. And now there are even more discussions and ideas to have the second one, inshallah, very soon. So what the GCC wants from Iran are simple and basic, really very basic, like any normal neighborhood. This is what we would like to reach with Iran. Iran is our neighbor, we are their neighbor, they are history, they are culture, they are art, they are music. Iran is not what you only see on the TV. I've been to Iran when I was a young boy in 1978. I've seen Europe and Iran. So this is what we would like to share with you. We have so much to give Iran. We have so much to share with Iran. We need to take the right steps. We need Iran to be our trade partner. We need Iran to be moving forward. We, as you said, no need to talk about the history. It's the present and the future that we should concentrate on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Secretary General. I want to shift to you, Natalie, and bring in the European angle into all of this. EU-Iran relations have really deteriorated. Everything from, and we see that Europe used to be the actor that mediated between the United States and Iran. That has been replaced now by GCC states. The Europeans, for the first time, perhaps see Iran as a direct threat because of its support of Russia. The Iranians are very upset that Europe did not uphold the JCPOA from their perspective. And then, of course, you had the German Chancellor praising Israel's attack on Iran and calling it that Israel was doing Europe's dirty work for it. And then, of course, the snapback decision in the last couple of months. What is Europe's strategy vis-a-vis Iran at this point, beyond escalation?
Well, I mean, that would kind of require a two-word answer, like there isn't basically any. But let me perhaps say a few things. Also, listening to what has been said up until now, what is it that we've learned, I think, over the last few months? We have learned that when diplomacy is unilateral, or rather bilateral, let's say it can't quite be trusted, right? I mean, there was a diplomatic process going on, and this did not prevent a war from taking place. So that's one lesson that can be learned. The second, and I think we've been discussing this, is that indeed there has been, and I think we can see it also from outside the region, a shift in perception in terms of which is the revisionist player in the region, or which is the most revisionist player in the region. It used to be Iran, rightly or wrongly, perceived to be as such. Today, it is perceived as being Israel. And that, I think, is also a second fundamental shift. I think that inevitably, there is a lot of soul-searching in Iran itself. It had a deterrence strategy, which relied very heavily on the role of proxies, and that hasn't turned out to be a spectacular success. And I think fundamentally, those two bits, on the one hand, Israel being perceived as the main revisionist player in the region, and on the other hand, inevitably, Iran having to at least reassess its own deterrence strategy is, I think, fundamentally what is bringing this growing convergence between Iran and the GCC. Now, we as Europeans, what is the problem here? So we were basically in the game in that very short period of time when things were going unlike how they normally go in the region. And it's very clear that we're no longer in that situation today. I think our problem as Europeans is that we have difficulty in holding two thoughts at the same time in our head. One thought, and it's absolutely correct, is that Ukraine is our first security priority. This is existential for Europe. And this is, I think, something that probably, not just here in the region, but elsewhere, people perhaps don't quite understand enough. So Ukraine is and will remain Europe's first and most existential priority. Now, that thought can be held in one's head while at the same time thinking that we don't necessarily need to view the rest of the world through the prism of the Russia-Ukrainian war. And I think this has been the fundamental mistake that we made in this region, both in terms of our relationship with Iran, but also the stance, for example, that we took in a subject which is not this subject of conversation, i.e. the Gaza war, right? It is basically this monodimensional perspective driven, as I said, by an existential interest, which has at least put us at this point in time out of the game. So as to your question, no, today we don't have a strategy. Now, looking ahead, what is it that one can say, joining all these bits together? Well, if we do know that actually unilateral diplomacy has not actually led to anything, if we do see this growing convergence between Iran and the Gulf, if Europe continues to have an interest in non-proliferation and in regional security, perhaps there is something that we could be doing to support that growing convergence, to basically put in place perhaps a different multilateral negotiation setup that could, in time, whether it's on the nuclear question or on other regional questions. But let us be very clear, we have always been, as Europeans, second players in the region, never first, right? And once upon a time, the United States used to look at Europe as being its support in the Middle East. Now it doesn't need Europe to play that role. Now it has the Gulf countries to play that role directly. It doesn't need Europeans. What, therefore, Europeans should be doing, rather than thinking through the prism of how is it that we can be useful to the United States in the Middle East, try and understand what its interests in the region are and approach countries in the region, providing the support that may or may not be needed.
So on the issue, what is Europe's interest? So much of the most important decisions Europe has made vis-à-vis Iran has been done, are decisions made by the E3, one of which is not even part of the EU any longer. And of course, with all of the things that have happened, there's tensions, etc. For the sake of actually being able to have positive movement on the EU-Iran front, do you think Europe needs to move beyond the E3?
Well, I think in many respects the E3 as was has run its course. I do think that generally speaking, and not just as far as Iran is concerned, European foreign policy is effective only when it is driven by a contact group. So I think, the trick is to have, on the one hand, something relatively small and relatively flexible, while at the same time having a link to the broader EU, which was really the magic of the E3/EU. But that particular format, I think, has run its course. So I think we should be thinking in terms of contact groups, but perhaps thinking about a slightly reconfigured. There are different European countries that are playing. Spain, for example. I don't want to talk about Italy. Spain, for example, has, I think, been playing a very interesting role in the Middle East over the last couple of years. So I think, thinking a little bit outside the box, yes, contact groups, yes, a link to EU institutions, but perhaps not quite what was done in the past.
Dr. ظریف, inside of Iran, you're known as one of the individuals who have favored improving relations with the EU, with the US, who have oftentimes seen the EU as a bridge to some form of a resolution of the tensions with the United States. At this point, what do you see the role of the EU potentially being?
Unfortunately, and with all due respect, everybody in Iran has lost faith with Europe. Because Europe proved to be shooting itself in the foot in order to please the United States. Europe, the exercise of the so-called snapback, I say so-called because you search the entire JCPOA, the entire 2231, and you won't find the word snapback. Not because we didn't think of it, because if you look at the documents that are all reflected in my book, you see the word snapback, but we managed to remove it. It's called dispute resolution mechanism. And Europe had no right, and it knew that it had no right. Even Joseph Borrell had to withdraw the letter that it circulated on behalf of the EU on the dispute resolution mechanism, because Iran had invoked the dispute resolution mechanism from 2nd September 2016, that is, while Obama was still in office. But Europe decided admittedly, to follow American instructions to invoke Article 36 of the JCPOA. Rubio shouted at the Europeans, yelled at the Europeans for them to go ahead and basically disempower themselves from playing any role in the Iran nuclear issue. The Europeans could have held the most important role because US was not part of the JCPOA, Europe was still part of the JCPOA, and Europe could have played a major role. So what did Europe gain by invoking 36? Absolutely nothing. And you read the national security strategy of the United States just published yesterday, it seems that based on that national security strategy, Europe is the greatest threat to democracy. That's the actually benefit that our European friends got from basically shooting themselves in the foot to please Donald Trump. So my suggestion to Europe, and this wasn't just the case with Trump. Let me give you just one example, Teresa, if I can. We signed an agreement with Airbus to purchase 118 Airbus airplanes in February 2016. Then we signed an agreement with Boeing to purchase 88 airplanes from Boeing in June 2016. In September 2016, when I threatened to invoke paragraph 36 of JCPOA, the Americans, the Obama administration, provided license. You know for how many airplanes? Out of 118 European Airbus planes that placed the request in February, the Americans only approved 18. Out of the 88 Boeing airplanes that placed the request in June, the Americans approved 80. Even then, our European friends did not come to realize that the United States did not have their best of interest in mind. When we negotiated the JCPOA, anytime we came to the American doing something, they said, we have to go to Congress, we have to see whether Congress would agree. Anytime it came, without the European presence, anytime we came to the interest of the Europeans, the Americans said, Europe will lift this sanction, Europe will lift the other sanction. So I think it is good for our European friends and for anybody else who believes that the United States will support their interests to wake up and see the United States will only support its own interests, and for the Israeli first, there's Israel's interest instead of its own interests.